1. The message that wasn't goodbye. This wasn't a goodbye, it was a warning. If you're reading this late, don't come. But he opened it anyway. Too late. Her place was empty, no fight, no note, just silence that felt louder than anything she'd ever said. He thought she was being dramatic, until he saw the timestamp. 3 hours before. What was she trying to stop him from seeing? And why did it feel like she already knew he wouldn't come in time? Subscribe to Hidden Angle Podcast to uncover what really happened next. 2. She always spoke softly. She always spoke softly, not because she was weak, but because she had learned that loud feelings often got ignored. So she chose quiet. Careful words, gentle timing, messages that never demanded, only offered. Hey, just wanted to check if you got home safe. I know you're busy, no pressure to reply. Missed you today, it's okay if you didn't notice. He would read them, sometimes instantly, sometimes hours later. The little scene mark would appear like a ghost of presence, proof that he was there. Just not with her, and somehow, that felt worse than being ignored completely. At first, she told herself he was just overwhelmed. Work, stress, life. She made excuses the way people do when they're still hopeful. When silence still feels temporary. When absence still feels fixable. But patterns don't lie. And his silence had a rhythm. He would disappear right when things got real. When she asked how he felt. When she opened up about her day, not the surface version. But the part that hurt. The part that needed someone to stay. Not scroll past. And every time, she adjusted, she softened more, shortened her messages, removed anything that might feel like too much. She became easier to love by asking for less. But something inside her was quietly breaking. Not in dramatic ways, not all at once. Just small shifts. She stopped expecting replies at night. Stopped rereading conversations. Stopped telling him the important parts. And the scariest part? He didn't notice. Because from the outside, nothing changed. She was still kind, still calm, still understanding. But inside, she was already learning how to leave. Not physically, not yet. But emotionally. She began writing things she would never send. Thoughts she kept to herself. Feelings she folded into silence. And slowly, the space between them grew, not from distance, but from everything left unsaid. He thought peace meant no conflict. She felt peace would have meant being heard. And somewhere between his comfort and her quiet, something real started slipping away. 3. The pattern he never noticed. There was a pattern. Not loud, not obvious. But consistent enough to shape everything between them. He didn't pull away all the time, just at the exact moments she needed him most. When things stayed light, he was there. Quick replies, casual jokes, easy presence. But the moment her words carried weight, he faded. It was almost precise. She would open up, slowly, carefully, about something that mattered. A long day, a quiet fear, a memory she hadn't shared with anyone else. And for a second, it felt like a door had opened between them. Then silence. Minutes would stretch into hours. Hours into the kind of waiting that makes you question if you said too much, or not enough. Her message would sit there, unanswered, like something fragile left in the open. And when he came back, it was never to what she said. He would respond to something safer. Sorry, got busy. Or send a random distraction. As if the conversation had never shifted. At first, she tried to hold the thread together. She would circle back gently. Rephrase, make it easier for him to step in. But every time she reached again, he stepped just slightly out of reach. Not enough to break things. Just enough to keep them from becoming real. And that's what made it confusing. Because he wasn't cruel. He didn't yell, he didn't leave, he didn't say anything that could clearly be called wrong. But he also never stayed long enough in the moments that mattered. It created a quiet contradiction she couldn't explain. How can someone be present and still feel absent? How can someone respond and still not hear you? Over time, she started anticipating the silence before it even happened. She would type something honest, then pause. Delete a sentence, soften a word, replace a truth with something lighter. Not because she didn't feel deeply, but because she already knew what depth would cost her. And slowly, she stopped bringing him into those spaces at all. The pattern didn't break. She just adapted around it. He thought nothing had changed. Because on the surface, everything still worked. But underneath, she had already begun living a version of her life that no longer included him where it mattered most. 4. The night everything shifted. That night didn't begin with anything dramatic. No argument, no raised voices, no clear sign that something was about to end. It was quiet. Almost too quiet. She texted him earlier than usual. Not a long message, just one line that felt different. Please don't come tonight. He stared at it longer than he should have. Not because he was worried, but because it didn't fit the version of her he had built in his mind. She was the one who waited. The one who adjusted. The one who never pushed him away. So he assumed it was just another moment that would pass. Another soft boundary that would dissolve if he ignored it long enough. He didn't reply. Minutes slipped into an hour. Then 2. The message stayed there, unanswered. Just like so many before it. But this one wasn't the same. There was no follow-up. No second text. No, it's okay. No attempt to make it easier for him to respond. Just silence. And for the first time, her silence felt intentional. He opened the chat again. Reread the message. Please don't come tonight. Not emotional, not reactive. Just final. Something in the way she wrote it felt like a door closing, quietly. But completely. Still, he told himself it wasn't serious. She'd always been there before. She would be again. So he waited. Not out of care. But out of habit. And then, hours later, something shifted. Not outside. Inside. A strange discomfort crept in. The kind you can't name, but can't ignore. He checked his phone again. Still nothing. No missed calls. No explanation. Just that one sentence, sitting there like it had been left on purpose. And suddenly, the absence felt different. Not like distance. But like removal. He tried to trace back the last time she sounded like herself. The last time her messages felt warm. The last time she reached for him, without holding something back. He couldn't find it. Because the truth was, this night didn't change anything. It revealed what had already changed. The difference was, he finally felt it. 5. It was never about the message. It was never about the message. Not the words, not the timing, not even that one night. He kept replaying it like it held the answer. That single line, over and over, as if meaning could be extracted if he looked long enough. But the truth didn't live there. Because nothing she wrote that night was new. It was just clearer. The real story had been unfolding long before that message. In the spaces between replies. In the pauses that stretched too long. In the way she slowly stopped bringing him into the parts of her that mattered most. He thought distance was something you could measure. Miles, days, missed calls. But hers was quieter than that. It showed up in the way she no longer asked how he felt. In the way she stopped waiting for his answers. In the way her messages became lighter, not because she felt less, but because she had learned he couldn't hold more. And without realizing it, he had taught her that. Not with words, but with absence. Every time he avoided something real. Every time he chose distraction over presence. Every time he returned just enough to keep things going, he was shaping the space between them. He wasn't leaving. But he wasn't staying either. And that in between, that's where she got lost. He used to believe that as long as they were still talking, as long as nothing had officially ended, then nothing was truly broken. But now, looking back, he could see the cracks had formed much earlier. Not from one big moment, but from hundreds of small ones. Moments where she reached and found nothing steady to hold on to. Moments where she softened and felt herself disappear a little more each time. By the time she sent that message, she wasn't asking for anything anymore. She wasn't hoping he would understand. She wasn't waiting for him to change. She was just closing something quietly. And maybe that's why it felt so different. Because it wasn't emotional. It wasn't reactive. It was resolved. The message wasn't a turning point. It was a reflection of everything that had already happened, of everything he hadn't seen. And now, for the first time, he wasn't reading her words. He was finally seeing the pattern behind them. 6. The moment it hit him. It didn't hit him all at once. There was no single moment where everything suddenly made sense. It came in fragments. Small flashes that didn't feel important at first. Until they started connecting. He was sitting alone, phone in his hand, scrolling through their messages. Not searching for anything specific, just trying to feel something familiar. But instead of comfort, he felt distance. Even in the texts where she sounded warm. There was a quiet restraint he had never noticed before. He kept going back. Further up, further back. Weeks, months. And then it started to shift. He noticed how often she said, "It's okay." Even when it clearly wasn't. How many times she softened her words. Right after he didn't respond. How she would adjust the tone of an entire conversation, just to keep him from pulling away. And suddenly, those weren't small things anymore. They were signals. Signals he had seen, but never really looked at. His chest tightened. Because now, he wasn't just remembering what she said, he was realizing what she didn't say. The things she held back. The moments she chose silence over honesty. The parts of herself she edited, just to stay connected to someone who was barely there. He tried to think of the last time she spoke freely. Without hesitation, without filtering. He couldn't. And that's when it hit him. Not like a shock. But like a slow, undeniable weight settling in. She hadn't been okay for a long time. She had just been quiet about it. And he had mistaken that quiet for peace. He thought he had time. Time to respond later. Time to fix things eventually. Time to show up when it mattered. But now he could see. Those moments had already passed. One by one. Unnoticed, unanswered. And the version of her he thought he still had already faded somewhere along the way. He wasn't losing her now. He had been losing her, slowly, all along. And the hardest part? There was no moment he could go back to. No single message he could rewrite. Because it wasn't one mistake. It was a pattern of almosts. Almost being there. Almost listening. Almost choosing her. And now. Almost wasn't enough. 7. Too late isn't a moment, it's a pattern. Too late isn't always one moment. It's rarely one slammed door. One missed call. One message opened a few hours after it mattered. Most of the time, too late is a pattern. It's every small delay you thought meant nothing. Every "I'll answer later." Every time you noticed someone growing quiet, and called it normal. Every time they reached gently, and you gave them half your attention, assuming there would always be another chance. That's what makes it so dangerous. It doesn't feel like loss while it's happening. It feels like life, routine, stress, timing. Until one day, the person is still there in front of you, but no longer with you in the same way. And by then, you start searching for the exact moment everything changed. But there wasn't one. There were dozens, maybe hundreds. Tiny moments where love asked for presence, and got postponement instead. Some people don't leave all at once. They leave in pieces. In silence. In lowered expectations. In the way they stop telling you the truth because it no longer feels safe to hope you'll hold it. So if this story stayed with you, maybe that's the real ache in it. Not that he read her message too late, but that he had been arriving too late for a very long time. And maybe someone in your life is still speaking softly. Still waiting. Still hoping you'll notice before their silence becomes permanent. If this touched something real in you, share this video with someone who needs it. Tell me in the comments, have you ever realized too late that the pattern was the wound? Like this video, and subscribe to Hidden Angle Podcast for more stories that stay quiet on the surface, but hit deep where it matters.